This is Ed from Policy Advisor, and I have here Ricky Walther, who's the immediate past president of the Veterinary Business Management Association, the VBMA. And we've teamed up to run a podcast / video series on different topics and things that vet students really need to know. And some of these things are going to be particularly timely given the recent coronavirus scare, but most of these things are going to be around just maybe key tips that you wouldn't necessarily get from the standard curriculum, coming from people who are now in the industry, or in Ricky's case, someone who recently graduated and is like fresh from the schooling experience and being able to understand maybe there's certain things that stood out above others, or certain things that he wasn't taught that he's since learned are actually quite important. So Ricky, where are you in your education right now, to give people a sense of like who you are and where you are in your journey?
I am a fourth year veterinary student, graduating in May, so in like a month and a half, from the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. I'm currently in the middle of my clinical education hours and trying to kind of finish up my last few rotations. And a little bit about my journey to like vet school and stuff. I was an animal science major at UC Davis, have spent the last 4 years at Davis in the vet school, and during that time have gotten really involved in kind of the industry side of veterinary medicine, as well as also kind of the connections between veterinary medicine and business. And so I just finished an 18-month term as the 2019 national president for VBMA, or the Veterinary Business Management Association. So I'm here to kind of talk on some of the things I've learned from that experience, and just kind of the general experience of vet school that I didn't necessarily get to learn in the curriculum.
Now, let's jump right into our first topic, which you actually suggested, which was, how to build your network as a vet student. I imagine so you can set yourself up for success. Why is a network important as a vet student? And what are the things to know about how to make it valuable and impactful?
Yeah, so part of the reason why I wanted to do this as one of the first topics we covered is because I think networking in vet school is not something that gets talked about very much. And if it does, it gets talked about in very kind of a general overarching way of you should network while in vet school. And no one really gives you specific details around what that looks like, why it's important, why you should spend valuable time that you could be studying veterinary curriculum, building a network. So to start off with, I kind of just want to talk about, why a network is important. I think, everybody has a dream to become a veterinarian. For some people that has lasted about a year or two prior to starting vet school. And for other people, that's something that they have wanted since they were a little kid. And the thing that happens when you get to vet school, which I'm sure many of the vet students that are listening to this are going to experience, is that you get to vet school and you always told everyone you were going to be a veterinarian. And now you have to know what type of veterinarian you want to be and what industry you want to work in. And there's thousands of options. And so I personally see networking as a way to explore all those options while in vet school and figure out what it is you want to do, because veterinary medicine is more than just deciding if you want to be small or large animal, or if you want to specialize in a certain topic like cardiology or nutrition or neurology or whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only options. There's tons of more creative ways to make all of your interests kind of intermingle and connect while in vet school. And I think networking is how you accomplish that. So I think that like the biggest things around networking that I want people to know is that for veterinary school, I think the biggest thing is to get involved early. So it's really scary when you first start vet school to think about adding more things to your plate, because it's a professional education. It's a lot of hours. It requires a lot of studying. But what I've found is that getting involved early gave me the ability to try a lot of things in my first year of vet school and decide what it is that I was passionate about. So I always tell people that I have mentored during vet school that they should kind of cast a wide net, join a lot of clubs, respond to all the emails and the interest things that you get around needing a vet student's help or a position that opens up, and just kind of pursue all those options and see what's interesting to you. So I tell people, join lots of clubs, go to lots of lunch talks and like lunch and learns and things like that, and try to get a variety of experiences and then narrow from there. So what I did is I joined tons and tons of clubs my first year. And then I found that, I really was only interested in going and signing up for talks from one or two of those clubs. And then kind of as vet school progresses, you narrow that down. Now from there, once you start to narrow that down over the first couple months, like then you start getting inundated with positions for leadership opportunities. And that kind of brings me to my next point of with networking, I think it's key to not be afraid of leadership opportunities. So for vet school, you know, we always, when you're in undergrad, you spend so much time trying to come up with, you know, how do you make the perfect resume so you can get into vet school? Now that's reversed, right? Like you're not doing it to get into a school, you're doing it to decide what it is you want to do with your life. So we have to change the way that we look at leadership to not just being a checkbox that gets put on your resume, but actually as something that can contribute to your network and contribute to where you want to go in the profession. So I recommend that people, you know, step outside their comfort zones. You don't need to be president of a club in order to, you know, make an impact, but any officer role has pros and cons to it. And I would argue that it's really important to start networking with people that hold the roles currently, decide what it is that you're going to get out of each one, and then pick and choose the best ones from there. If you're trying to think about how do you do this thing called networking, that's the first piece, right? Is getting involved at your local school, deciding what it is you're passionate about. For me, that was business. And so I joined the VBMA and I became the chapter president. And that skyrocketed my networking experience while in vet school, because I surveyed a lot of clubs, talked to a lot of officers, found that that one was the one that was going to get me the most exposure to the people I wanted to meet, and go from there. And you don't even have to know who those people are. You just need to put yourself in situations that allow you to build that network. And I think those club positions are the best way to do that.
To me, when I think of the benefit of some of these positions and growing your network through these positions, some of the things that come to my mind just as being in the marketing industry and dealing with different businesses for the last like 5 or 6 years, I'm finding that the network is really impactful to be able to exchange ideas, to be able to have like a community, even if it's a very tiny community. Maybe you wouldn't even call it a community, but just having a small group where you can bounce ideas off of, where you have kind of like a pulse on completely different perspectives that are all kind of like in the same environment, but with vastly different, you know, perceptions of either how to approach a problem or what certain priorities might be. And certainly from the opportunity standpoint, as you mentioned, like having a network, I think is always like the number one thing that most people think of is like for new opportunities. But I think it's also really valuable for advice and for just kind of creative brainstorming and being able to kind of pull from a broader range of advice when you need it.
Yeah, no, and I think that kind of is that's a really good segue into, you know, why is it important to have a network? And I think that you would kind of hit the nail right on the head, that it's classically people say you have to have a network because it helps open up job opportunities. It kind of helps you with where you're going to go next. And the cool thing is that veterinary school is a 4-year experience. Like it's not just a short-term thing. You have time to decide where you want to go. So people always ask me, well, like, how do I get involved in networking and like building my network if I don't know where I want that network to go? And what I always tell people is that it's all about meeting as many people as you can and doing exactly what you were just talking about around building out the skills needed to have a brainstorm conversation and talk about new ideas, gain new perspectives. The reason why I think networking is important in vet school is because it opens up our minds to more about what the profession is as a whole. It's really easy as a veterinarian to get sucked into the day-to-day clinical tasks of diagnosing, treating, and prescribing medications and doing those things that we all know how to do as veterinarians. But you're part of such a very small and intimate community that everybody knows everyone. Everybody is, they say, 1 to 2 degrees of separation away from each other in the vet space. And so it's all about putting yourself in context. It makes what you're doing make a bigger impact, and it also makes it make more sense. Like, why am I getting up every day to provide this service? Well, it's because of what the veterinary profession as a whole is doing, and it makes it so you don't feel alone and all of those things. And so I think that some of the ways to kind of put this into practice are taking those initial leadership opportunities and then figuring out ways that you can expose yourself to the rest of the profession. And so I think a huge part of this is putting yourself in roles that allow you to travel. And I think it's something that people are really scared of. But one of the things that has helped me immensely while I've been in vet school is to take opportunities that allow me to go somewhere else, whether or not that means it's a research grant opportunity that allows me to go to another vet school, meet a bunch of people who are working on a research project. Or for me with the VBMA, as a chapter president, I got to go to Orlando to the VBMA meeting and meet chapter officers from around the country. And that is where that networking gets kind of put to the next level, where now it's not just about meeting people at your school, which is great, and meeting faculty and things like that, but now it's about meeting the profession as a whole. I always tell people that it feels like I have like seen behind a curtain, like you don't know it's there until you've been exposed to it, and then you can't unsee the profession that you're part of. And so I think getting yourself exposed to that, right? Meeting industry professionals, meeting, creating connections, like the, connections that I've made with the policy advisor and things like that. Like those are all things that would have never happened to me in vet school if I didn't put myself out there, meet people, people know people, and that's how you continue to grow that network. Most of the opportunities that I've been given have been from somebody who knew somebody who had an opportunity and kind of said, oh, I think Ricky would be a really good fit for X, Y, or Z. So networking is all about building that relationship. A lot of people don't know how to do it. Like they think that there's like a certain system, or people will go to lunch talks and that someone will tell them, here's how to network or skills to networking. And what I find is that as a veterinary student, I think, yes, those skills can help you if you're nervous, but that's not what I want to focus on, because what I want to focus on is that networking is about being yourself. It's about being who you are and letting other people into what it is that you're excited about. What is it that you know about? What are you an expert in? All those things. And as vet students, we don't feel like experts in anything, but we are experts in what it's like to be a vet student. And that's what I found is actually hugely important, because if you can use that to your advantage. The profession is a couple different groups of people, either people who were in vet school and know what it was like and are now veterinarians, or they're people who have interacted with veterinarians for so long and heard them tell stories of what vet school was like that they know something about the vet school experience. So I find that it's really easy to network with people I've never met before, because if I just start talking about veterinary school and the things that I'm doing and experiencing, people can relate to it or they have questions about it. And then I can turn that conversation into basically being an expert in that space, showing them that I know what I'm talking about because it's something I've gone through, not necessarily because I'm an expert on a certain content area, but just because I have thoughts and experiences. And everybody loves vet students from my experience. Like traveling, you don't meet anybody who's like, oh, you're a vet student, I don't want to listen to your perspective. They all want our perspective because we're the future generation of the profession. So even industry partners that didn't go to vet school potentially, they still want to know what it's like because they want to know the best way to connect with us. And so you can kind of turn that on its head and build that network, make those important kind of value adds to them. And that's, I think, a big thing with networking is showing how you can add value to the person you're trying to talk to, so that before you're trying to ask them for an opportunity or having them think of you to connect, you provide value to them. So that's talking about the things that they're interested in. So it's asking questions, it's listening, and it's providing a response. I don't really think that networking is any more complicated than that. Now, if you go to a huge conference and there's hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe there's some ways to maximize that networking effort. But what I've found is the vet profession is small enough that if you just interact with a couple people and make some core connections every time you're in an experience or situation where you can, that your network just slowly grows. And then over the course of 4 years, you turn around and look back at that, and that network's actually something you can use. And so I think that that's kind of, I wanted to kind of break down that myth around there's no right way to network. It's just about putting yourself out there and being yourself, and other people are drawn to that.
I think one thing I've also picked up is that it's very helpful to understand that to be valuable in a networking environment, you either have to be a node or a connector. And so there's really two facets or two roles that you can play when networking. And you're either going to be like a particular expert in a very niche topic area or topic facet, or you're going to be the guy or girl that people go to because they know everyone and that they're 1 degree or 2 degrees away from that answer. I think that that's realizing that a few years ago for me was also really helpful to understand my role in networking, because I think it can be overwhelming. As a student, I'm sure you guys are like, I got to take in all this information. I have to do everything. I have to get straight A's. This just one other thing I have to ace, and it puts a lot of pressure. And so I think if you're able to kind of rethink about it in a different way, where it's more like you don't have to be good at all these different topics, and you don't even have to know all these different people. Pick a category. Are you going to be a node? If you are, then maybe dive on one particular topic, and when you are networking, you're introducing yourself as that topic authority. If that's not in your wheelhouse, then you're introducing yourself as the connector, and as like, hey, let me know what you're working on, or like leave me your number and email. I'll see if there's anyone in my network who might be able to help you, and I'll put you in touch, and actually make the effort to do so. At first it's going to be a slow start, but eventually you'll build a stronger habit and a stronger muscle of actually connecting people, and you'll be known for that. I when I think about my network, there's certain people that I know to go to from like a business standpoint to solve certain problems. Like, this is someone to go to for analytics and tracking. This is someone to go to for maybe like broader branding strategy. But then I also have people in my network that I'm like, I don't really know where to go, so I go to them because I know that they know where to go. I think that's just a very powerful concept to realize as well as a vet student, is node versus connector.
No, I think that's exactly right. And you can be both in different situations. And I think that's what I've found that's really cool about this profession, is because everybody knows everybody, like, you will at some point get to act as that connector piece and connect other people. And the longer you're in the profession, the better you start to realize that. You also brought up a really good point there around the fact that I hear a lot from a lot of my friends. Like, some of my best friends see the kind of stuff that I go and do, and they're like, how on earth do you have time for that? Like, we have so much going on our plates. We have tests to study for, we have clinics to prepare for, all that stuff. And what I want to say to vet students is that, like, I want to give a little bit of an example about what I've been able to accomplish during my 4th year, because I think it shows that it's possible. I wouldn't say I'm at the top of my class, but I'm doing well academically in my class. I have time for clinics, and I also was just finished as a national president for a national organization that required a lot of time and commitment. So I do feel like I have, some ability to say I've done it. I survived, and I got a ton out of it, and I still didn't have to suffer any piece of that. And so kind of it's kind of my quote that I'm sure heard from somebody else through the grapevine of things, but I use it in my mentoring when I talk to people, and I tell everybody that I talk to that the way that I see getting involved in vet school is, I tell everybody, like, don't let school get in the way of your education, because you're going to veterinary school to become a veterinarian and to be part of a larger picture that is the veterinary profession. And school is just one aspect of that. No one, like, very few people are going to care exactly what letter grade you got in what particular class at a granular detail when you get out of school. What they are going to care about, though, is that you understand where you fit in the bigger picture. And so I've used that since day one of vet school, is seeing how can I let all aspects of my education, which the way that I see that is that's learning the medicine, but also learning how to apply that medicine to the general profession as a whole. So how can I use school as a resource to do that? And then also the extracurriculars that come from being in school, I see as just as important to my overall education. And so that's reflected in the amount of time I spend on things. Like, I would say that during my 4th year, like, obviously you're in the clinic all day, and that can be draining and taxing. But what I found is there's little times and inefficiencies in that process, and in vet school in general, where I can pop on, jump on a call, do some emails. I mean, I'm recording this right now while also doing virtual clinics at home during the COVID stuff. So, you can figure out ways to prioritize your time. And I find stuff like this extracurricular aspect to my education, as the fun part that recharges me, because I can sit and stare at a book for hours and hours and hours. There's only so much I'm going to absorb. Time management is key, but I also have not found it to be very hard, because I find this stuff fun. So traveling, meeting people, being part of these experiences are all important ways to build your network, because it ends up doing so much for you at the end of that career. And I think that's something else we can kind of touch on in this. is getting back to why networking in vet school is so important. Well, it's important because vet school ends. It's a finite amount of time. It's a 4-year period of your life that then you get to the end of. And now, what I'm experienced is now you have to know what you're doing next. Like, you can go through the first couple years of vet school and kind of be like, oh, I'm just trying everything, meeting a bunch of people. And then you get to 4th year and people start asking you, what are you going to do with your life? What do you want next? And so for me, I knew I wanted to go into small animal practice. I knew I wanted to get mentorship out of that experience. So I used some of the built-in school mechanisms of networking, like doing externships, to not just go do something that sounded super fun and different and interesting, but also tried to pick locations where I could see myself working, finding veterinarians in the area I wanted to work, and kind of working with those people. I'm going to be working at a hospital that I externed at. And so that's a kind of a perfect example of networking through showing kind of who I am in a school setting, but in a structured externship, and then adopting that to now having a job, right? But what I found is that networking in vet school made job searching extremely easy. When I got to the point in my vet school career where it was time for me to start looking for jobs, which was a couple months ago, I sent an email to like 5 or 6 of the people that I'd met during some of these conferences I went to, or a faculty member that I knew through, different club events, and said, okay, this is where I want to work. This is what I want to do. Who do you know of that's looking? Even if you don't know of a position, do you know anyone I can contact and connect with? And what I've found is that I had more options of people reaching back out to me saying, oh yeah, connect with this hospital or talk to this person or do this thing, than I ever thought I'd ever have. And that's all because of networking while in school. Like, it was super easy. It took me 2 minutes to send an email, but because I'd spent the time and effort to actually connect with those people, reconnect with those people, and continue to use that network while in school, made it super easy to find, connect, and utilize my network to find a job right after school. And I think the other thing too is that networking in vet school is important for finding your first job, but it's also just as important for finding your 10th, 12th, 15th job in this profession. Most of the people that I've met in this industry don't do the same thing or work at the same place for their whole career. We go and do different things. We are very versatile in our training, and we can use that in a lot of different areas, whether that be business, whether that be startups, whether that be public health, whether that's specialties. I see people change 5 or 6 times throughout their career and try new things. And so by building the network in vet school, you set yourself up for being able to do that. Some of the people that I met during my time with VBMA are the kind of people that I'll be using in 5, 10, 15 years, where I decide that I want to try something different. And maybe I won't get to that point, but at least now I have that foundation to know that I have a great first job that I'm super excited about. And then also some feelers out there for what like step 5, 6, 7, 8 down the road are going to look like. And all of that is just from putting yourself out there, being yourself, and being honest with what it is that you want in the profession and what it is that you feel that you can contribute. I find it gives me something to focus on and something to be excited about when day-to-day vet school life can get kind of daunting, exhausting, and you feel kind of burnt out. What I've found is now that I'm at the end of my 4th year, like when you ask me, like if I'm burnt out from vet school, yes, like vet school is exhausting. It's tiring. It takes a lot out of you. But I find that I'm really, really excited every single day now that I'm finishing, because now I'm seeing what can I do next? Where am I going next? There's all these options to me. It doesn't feel like I'm stuck. It doesn't feel like I have one choice. It feels like because I did my due diligence while I was in vet school to grow that network, that I can use it to find where I'm going to be happy. And I think that that's what's important for vet students to know, is that you can do this. And it doesn't have to be something like I chose to kind of make this a priority when I was a first year vet student, but it doesn't have to be something that you start the first day of vet school. Whenever, if you're listening to this right now and you have been wanting to, like, I would encourage you to take that leap of faith and do it and start putting yourself in situations where you're uncomfortable. If you told me the first day of veterinary school that I was going to help run a national organization, I would have laughed at you. And now looking back at it, like, it's something that I think I did a really good job with, and it was really fun. And now looking back on it, I'm like, I actually did have those skills. I just didn't know it yet. And I think that's how every single vet student would feel after an experience like that, is that you don't actually know if you're qualified for something until you try it. So always put yourself out there, always push the limits. And then I think that's how you grow and build a useful, strong network while in vet school.
Would it be fair to say that to those that might ask, how do I juggle all this, that it really comes down to balancing it with, the rest of your priorities, knowing that some of the sacrifices will need to be made, but while you prioritize in the list of items that need to happen, networking should actually be one of the top priorities. And it's an asset that as you invest in, even if it doesn't pay off immediately, will continue to grow over time and will likely pay much greater returns further down the road the longer that you hold those relationships.
Yep, exactly. I think that's the key to kind of getting the most out of veterinary school. Is veterinary school, the reason we go is to get a huge, vast amount of knowledge in order to use throughout our careers. It's the same kind of concept that when we get out of vet school, we're not going to encounter every single disease process that we learned about in vet school within the first week of practice. Right. We may not encounter our first Addison's disease case for 5 months, but because we learned about it and we know what to do, it makes that experience better. It's the same thing with networking. Like, I'm not going to reconnect with every single person that I put feelers out there for and created a relationship with during vet school within the first week out of school, but it's setting me up for all those possible opportunities that exist in the future. And it's all about that was a priority of mine. School was a priority of mine. My personal life was a priority of mine. I was somebody who people laughed at because I used to put my backpack down when I walked in the door. I'd study at school, come home, put my backpack by the door, and I'd pick my backpack up in the morning and go to school. And people are like, how did you not study at home? And I was like, because I made a very clear decision to study at school and be at home. I was engaged when I started vet school. I got married while in vet school. Home was important to me. It was my personal life. And so I think that that's kind of the same thing when you talk about networking, when you talk about academics, when you talk about your personal well-being. Like, they're all kind of balls you have to juggle, and you can't be holding them all at the exact same time. You have to let some of them go for a second in order to actually effectively get through the motions. But setting up priorities and making them all part of what you do on a daily basis is important. And, being flexible and deciding, this week I have a lot of tests, and this week I'm not going to go to that one event because I need to pass my exams and I need to do well. But then next week there's 3 or 4 more opportunities that maybe I wasn't exactly going to go to because I'm tired because I just studied, but I'm going to push myself to go to that networking opportunity or that lunch talk or listen to this person speak, because it's important, because that's something that's going to benefit me later. And I think if you can look at vet school as your launching pad for your career, then you'll start to do more and more about trying to get every single possible opportunity you can fit into that vet school experience. And I think you'll find that it's more enjoyable, because at the end of the day, networking in any fashion, even if it's not something you love, is still more exciting than spending hours and hours and hours reading the same textbooks. So I think, there's always a trade-off.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people who really struggle with like extroversion needed to network effectively? Someone who might say, oh, I'm going to go to this event, but I'm the person that tends to float by the bar and just kind of like talk to the bartender, if that, just kind of just milk the drinks and that's about it. What tips might you have for people to who are more naturally introverted to like kind of crack this networking?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And I think that, people think that like I am an extrovert, so I don't necessarily know what it's like to be an introvert, but I do have plenty of friends that are. And for example, if you look at like our national board for the VBMA while I was on it, I was very extroverted, and like 4 out of the 6 of us were extremely introverted, but we were all put in networking opportunities all the time. And what I found is that a couple tips for you. One is that being introverted doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get into a mode to make it an effective communication for you. So even if maybe your go-to skill isn't loving being around a bunch of people and talking to a lot of people. It's all about feeling like you're confident enough to start that conversation. So that's what I was talking about around like being a vet student. You already are an expert on something that those people in those rooms are going to care about. So start with something you know so that it's not scary. You don't have to practice what it is you're going to say. Talk about who you are as a person and be authentic in that, and then let that grow. And I think what you'll find is that the conversation leads to things that you do feel comfortable with. The other thing too is people often have the opinion that a networking opportunity means I have to go and talk to 50 people. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. Some of my introverted friends on the board and kind of in vet school in general, we'd come up with like, hey, we're going to this networking event. There's X, Y, and Z people here. We need to make sure we kind of cover and talk to these different people for the organization we're a part of. And what some of them would do is say like, okay, well, really all I'm trying to do tonight is talk to this one person. Like if I can talk to him for even 5 or 10 minutes, the event was worth it. And I think if you can look at it like that, right? Like if you have a career fair at your school, and there's 80 people on the list that are coming, employers, industry partners, all those things, right? You don't have to talk to all 80. The extrovert might say, yeah, that sounds really fun. I want that challenge. I want to talk to everybody. Great, more power to you. But if you're an introvert, I would come with a plan and decide like, you know, talking to a bunch of people is exhausting for me. So I'm going to prioritize and go and find the 2 or 3 people that I really want to make a good connection with. And if you talk to them for 5 minutes, that's still enough to create a network. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. It just has to be a useful and genuine conversation. If you're an introvert, I think it can be really easy to say, this isn't where I shine, so I don't want to put myself out there. And the way to combat that is to come with a plan, know what you want to talk about and know what you want to communicate and get that across. And also just be flexible. It's not a elevator pitch. It's not something that you have to be able to say the right way. We're in a relationship-centered business, whether people know it or not. And so people want to make connections. Like I also tell people that, you know, veterinary medicine, I hear a lot of my colleagues say that they join veterinary medicine because they like animals more than people. And I'll be the first one to burst your bubble that this profession is all about people and it's all about who you know. And so if you don't like people, you'll learn to like people because it's important. And you'll find that there's ways to interact with them in small doses that you still don't necessarily have to love talking to a million people to get your point across. You can kind of come with a mission, talk to those certain people, and go from there.
That's a great point. Me, I fluctuate between being extroverted and introverted, and some things I've found that help me when I'm feeling particularly introverted. Because you're right, it is really important to come across as like authentic, right? You want to be you. And it can be like tricky about how do you do that? You don't want to just give someone an elevator pitch and then the conversation runs dry and after 3 sentences, because it's just, no one wants to really necessarily talk business in that manner. So some things that I found to be effective have been to ask people, what projects are they most interested in right now, to prompt the conversation just by saying, hey, I like read this really interesting thing recently, and this is what it made me think. Like, what are your thoughts on it? Honestly, those 2 are usually my default. I just fall back to, because generally I'm someone who likes to read, whether it's like scientific articles or maybe it's business related or even like just random things, right? But kind of like falling back on your interest in things that pique curiosity. That's usually the safest route to get to an area where someone's like, oh, I kind of want to talk about this and share my curiosity, because that's people's curiosities are where their passions lie, and it's much easier to get them to open up in that regard, and then to have a natural conversation, because then there's going to be a volley back and forth.
Yep, that's a really good point. I think anytime I've been in a networking opportunity or situation where I didn't know what to talk about, I think the best default is to go towards asking questions, because let the person who you're trying to get to know or create a connection with lead the conversation, in the sense of if you ask a question, they're going to respond in a way that shows you what they're interested in, and then you can move from there. The other thing too that I think is really important, right, is that networking doesn't only happen at networking events. And I think that's something that people also need to keep in mind. Networking happens all the time. Anytime you're around other people, you are networking. And so if you look at it from that perspective and figure out how even leaving a conference room where you were just getting CE and walking back to the hotel, and whoever you're standing next to, you may know who that person is, you may not, but make a conversation, make a connection, because maybe it's somebody you're never going to see again and it won't matter, or maybe it's a future employer and you won't really ever know the difference. So you might as well approach every situation as like it could potentially be somebody to form a connection with. That also makes it less scary. I would say if you're introverted and afraid to network, the best way to get better at it is to practice. So if it's more comfortable for you to have a conversation with somebody while you're walking to and from class, like walk to lab across campus next to somebody who you don't typically talk to in your class and try to strike up a conversation with them. Maybe that is something that's super basic and easy, but that kind of a skill is something that if you practice over and over again, it becomes natural to you, and you don't have to be extroverted to be good at networking. You just may need to spend a little bit more time coming up with the skills that make you feel comfortable, because I've been in plenty of networking opportunities where somebody is extremely uncomfortable and doesn't know what to say, and it's hard to network with somebody who's trying to be somebody else. I'd much rather them literally come out and say in the moment, this is super uncomfortable for me. I'm not used to being in these situations. I'm trying to make the best of it. Because then we can laugh and talk about why that is, or move on. If the person you're talking to is an extrovert or something, or feels more comfortable, maybe they'll just say something to make you feel more comfortable. Like,
Right.
it doesn't have to be I think when I've gone to networking talks and people say, you know, here are the 5, 6, 7 steps to networking, I don't think it works like that. I think networking is more fluid and more like a just natural experience. And if you do it right, it doesn't feel like you're doing anything. It just feels like you're being yourself in a situation with people you don't know.
Yeah. And actually, to your point, I think another good way to get that feeling is, as you said, to ask questions. And they can be literally just around, like, you know, what are your goals in life, in your career, whatever, and just ask questions about how to achieve them. Like, is it the next step in your schooling? Is it the next step in your career? Is it the next step in your personal life? Whatever, you know, whatever your aspirations are, even, you know, whether you don't have the answers about how to get there, those are great questions to ask. But even actually, if you know the steps, even if you're certain that, okay, you know, I know I need to do A, B, C to get to D, just forget that you know how to do them and ask for that feedback anyway.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest way to say, hey, you know, I've been working on this, or I'm trying to figure out this. These are the issues I don't really understand, or I'd love some feedback on. Do you have any ideas in these areas? And it's just a really easy way to get that conversation going in an authentic way, where it's not, you're not like having to think of like icebreakers or like, oh, be someone else. It's literally just,
Yeah.
it almost, for those introverts then that tend to default on the transactional, that's almost a line where it's like borderline transactional, but it won't feel that way in the right context.
I think what, you know, one of the other things too is within this profession, you know, everybody knows somebody who's doing something that they find interesting. So one of the things that I've found that's helped me with networking is to identify people that I know of. I may not know them, they may not know who I am, but find people who are doing things that I could see myself doing in the future. And then just actually just trying to ask those people how they got there. What does that look like? You know, exactly like you were talking about, you know, if you don't know what to talk to someone about, ask them to tell you their story. Everybody has a story, everybody's going to share it. And if you find a way to, you don't necessarily walk up to somebody and say, hi, I'm Ricky, tell me your story. But you say, for example, I've been at the AVMA conference in DC last summer, and you're in a networking event that's like a happy hour after a CE event. You can ask somebody you walk up to, like, oh, what brings you to this conference? Perfect way for them to tell you why they're there. And then that gives you ways to ask questions about their past so that you can create a conversation. You don't have to go into a conversation knowing where it's going to go, because there are plenty of times where I've had somebody that I want to connect with because maybe they're really, really good at practice management and I want to ultimately learn from them. When I first meet them, I don't have to go up to them and say, I want you to tell me all about how you manage your practice. I can just get to know them. I've made the connection. And then when I need that resource later, I can ask them for advice on that topic because they know who I am. Networking isn't about going into every situation trying to get something out of that specific situation. It's about creating a relationship that you can use later to get the resources you want.
I think that about covers it. Is there anything else that might come to mind as final advice here?
I think my, you know, kind of general final advice as far as networking while in vet school goes. Vet school is an amazing opportunity, and it's something that you can, if you take full advantage of, it will set you up for a really, really great career as you move forward. All you have to do is to be open and be open-minded and understand that every situation is going to give you something from it. And if you go into every situation saying, you know, I'm just going to experience this, be myself, I think you'll find that it's a really easy thing to network. You don't have to be deliberate about networking in order to create a network. You just have to be aware enough that there's a bigger process going on to actually see how the relationships you find connect with each other and create that picture for you afterwards. So my biggest advice to people is be open. You view every single conversation you have in vet school as a way to create your network, and you'll see that it grows in and of itself without you trying very hard. And I think what you'll find is after 4 years of doing it, you'll look back and know that you know quite a few people, and you can use that to your advantage when you need it. But, you know, it's always about being genuine. It's always about figuring out, you know, how can you make it a mutually beneficial relationship? You can't just always want something from them. You have to be able to make it a relationship back and forth that both people benefit from in order to then utilize it in the future.
Actually, on as a closing thought, two other things just popped in my mind. One is don't be afraid to follow up in emails. I think it's a thing I see a lot of times as well, is that someone will send an email and they don't hear back from them, and they're like, "Oh, they must not care." The reality is that people are busy as hell, and your inbox is flooded all the time. And even if they care in that moment, maybe they just aren't doing the right thing at the right time. Honestly, half the time, if someone, now this is less about networking, but just general outreach as a whole, if someone reaches out to me and they don't follow up, it's almost a sign to me that they don't care that much. It's kind of like, if you don't care enough to follow up, how much do you really care? So just never be afraid to follow up. I would say at least twice. Is that, feel free to ping them again after a week of no response. Ping them again, even if they don't respond further. People in the marketing and sales industry use this to like a greater extent. They'll follow up like 8 or 9 times. Maybe that's pushing it, but from a networking sense, don't be afraid of like silence. Like always follow up at least 1 or 2 times. I'm actually curious on your thoughts on this as well, Ricky, as we close out. But I think there's a lot of opportunities for publication, whether it's not just scientific publication, but more through other brands. And when you think of like building your confidence, even if it's your self-confidence, being able to say that, hey, I wrote for Chewy.com, right? They had me as like an author or validated one of their blog posts. Or, for Policy Advisor, we constantly looking for veterinarians to talk about different content topics as the experts. And there's tons of brands that do something similar. I actually get like a reoccurring feed of different reporters that are constantly looking for quotes and snippets across industries, whether it's Forbes, Business Insider, you name it, like these big brands that just kind of need quotes from people. There's a lot of potentially untapped opportunity that veterinarians or vet students might not know about, because it's kind of like this other marketing world. But there is a wealth of desire for people to have veterinary opinions. And it could be an interesting way to start getting your name out there in all these different websites. And it's like, as more and more people see you, that's going to be beneficial just to your own psychology, to be like, yeah, you know what, I'm on all these kinds of websites. I am an authority. It kind of reinforces yourself that you are that authority. But also from an opportunity standpoint, the headhunters, the recruiters, the connectors out there, you're going to be more prevalent to them potentially, because you're going to be popping up more and more just in Google search results and in other facets.
You bring up a really good point, because it's something we're not exposed to in veterinary school, but I think it's something that as all veterinary students, as they experience this profession, they'll find that when it comes to the general public, veterinarians don't talk very much on non-peer-reviewed researched literature. Like, that's where you see veterinarians putting their opinions out there. And I think that that's a disservice that we provide our potential clients and the pets that we work with. Like, us talking about our experience and what it's like to be veterinarians and the knowledge that we have from a medical perspective in ways that other people read them is very important. So As far as networking goes, maybe this is a perfect way for some people who are more introverted to interact, right? Like maybe going to an event with 500 people in a room is not something you're ever going to be comfortable with. Okay, then maybe use some of these ways to write some articles for some people, or reach out to some of these people who are needing quotes, wanting quotes, stuff like that. And say, hey, I'm a veterinary student. I'd love to talk about the veterinary experience and medicine in general. Is there anything I can add? I don't think anybody in the marketing world is ever going to turn you down for wanting to provide perspective on something, because there aren't that many vets in the world. And so we already have a unique perspective that very few people actually have. And most vets are afraid to talk about it. So if you can be one of those people that does it, it's a great way to do that. And I also wanted to circle back to your email comment. One of the best pieces of advice someone ever gave me is that anytime you meet somebody who you do connect with and you want to create a relationship with, I've always found that it's super useful to send a follow-up email or text message if you got their cell phone number, whatever it is, and say, like, thanks for our conversation. I really enjoyed talking about X, Y, and Z, and put a couple of the things you discussed in writing in that text or in that email. I found that it helps solidify you in their minds because you reached out afterwards, showed you cared. And then also you put details in there in case they also met 500 people. And that way they know who you are and they can put the face and the conversation they had in person to whatever kind of follow-up communication you're planning on using to connect with them afterwards. I found that that's super helpful. And it avoids that kind of awkward response when you get back of like, yeah, it was great talking to you. And that's all they say. And it's because they don't actually remember the conversation. So if you can kind of reconnect their memory to who you are, you solidify in their memory more than just, here's my business card. I get tons of business cards. I may not remember the conversation, but if someone emails me afterwards and says, I gave you my business card, this is what we discussed, it helps me queue up who that person is. So, there's a lot of ways to network. There's a lot of ways to put yourself out there. And I think vet school is the time to do it because, believe it or not, you have more time and access to resources while in vet school than you will when you're a practicing clinician out in practice. So you can do it now, it'll benefit you later.
Well, amazing. Thanks for this, Ricky. This was as always, a super valuable conversation. I hope everyone watching or listening to this gets, tons of value in terms of like real vet student experience and impactful tactics to actually implement. And yeah, looking forward to our next conversation. So
yeah, sounds good. Thanks for having me.